sorry guys. The national norms are also important because those are percentiles. So, why are percentiles important? I'm going to give you a visual example of why. So in this case, we have Johnny, right? Look at the red arrows for me. And at the beginning of the year, Johnny had a scale score of 201. Then at the middle of the year, when Johnny retested, he got a scale score of a 205. Well, now when I was first teaching, I would go, it's not a huge jump, but that's growth. It can't be a bad thing. But then I kind of had an aha moment. So if you look at the percentile range in the middle number there, at the beginning of the year, Johnny was in the 40th percentile. But then if you notice Johnny's percentile in the winter, he dropped to the 39th. So here's the deal. If a kid is not moving fast enough towards their typical growth, like where they should be moving, how much they should be moving within that year, they can actually be considered regressing. Like in this case, even though Johnny grew a little bit, he didn't grow enough to be reaching that typical growth score. So again, that's how he dropped zero point 0.1 of a percentile. Excuse me, 1% of a percentile. Okay. So how do we know that they are progressing towards their typical or stretch growth? So again, just as a report, you go to reports, diagnostic growth report, the one that says typical growth, you can kind of see how close they are. If it is the middle of the year and the child has not reached at least 50% of their typical growth, you need to be seeing them more or pulling them more because that's kind of like a red flag moment. Okay. With this particular side, I just wanted to mention for anybody that's written their PDP on either typical or stretch growth, like I know fifth grade had, one thing to keep in mind, iReady says based on national norms, about 25% to 35% of kids actually do meet their stretch growth. So that's not a super big number. So the only thing I would ask you to keep in mind is if you're going to write a goal for stretch growth, I would think about a group of kids that demonstrate readiness. Like maybe they're bubble kids and you can set kind of go, okay, they're ready to be pushed a little bit. Or maybe kids that you know you have all day, they're not getting constantly pulled out, so you feel like you've got some locus of control there. Something to keep in mind. Another feature I like is this one on the North Carolina standards. So if you go to reports, class, and the North Carolina standards, you'll notice, and you'll see on the left-hand side here, the actual North Carolina standards like 4.1, whatever. And it'll tell you how your class as a whole and the individual students performed on the questions that connect to a specific standard. So like the iReady questions that somehow connect, even though they're not directly aligned. So if your class has kids on with a green check, that means that they got basically the majority of the questions that connect to that standard correct, and you're doing okay. If they have a grade check, that means they got some of them, but it still needs to be cycled back. If they got an X, that means they really did not get a sufficient number at all, and you're going to need to cycle that in a lot. So heads up on that. Now, I would like us to do intervention cycles for both M-Class and iReady. I'm still making up my mind about how I want to make that work with y'all next week in particular, just because I feel like for K through 3, we probably will want to prioritize M-Class. Either way, next week will be workshopping, no matter what. But for my little people teachers, this is an example of what you could do for iReady. So with math, so in this case, I just took a homeroom class, did their skill score, Lexile, national norm, the bottom area. So like if their bottom area was geometry, we would put geometry and what they scored, and then the actual lessons that we can do to attack this bottom domain. And based on like the grade level, so like for instance, I have this kid, and this kid, Wilson, Kimberly, and Madison are all performing on a kinder level in that bottom domain. So those kids might be my group 1.